Dr. Bronte Forbes, and he is going to speak about the application of objective asymmetry assessment / latest locator, a new tool in the box. Now, how do we use it? Ladies and gentlemen, with any luck, Dr. Bronte Forbes.
Thank you very much. It's slightly strange sitting in here in Singapore speaking to you all, but I'll do my best. Firstly, I don't profess to be an expert on this subject at all, but I hope that our experience here in Singapore using objective asymmetry assessment in both the clinical and regulatory sense, if I share that with you, it will at least put something towards the conversation. I'm going to mainly concentrate on how we use it in a racing regulatory sense, because we're fairly unique, I think, in Singapore in using it for that purpose quite commonly. So the first thing I'll do is just explain how we work here in Singapore. We have 7 veterinarians, 2 associate veterinarians. The experience between those veterinarians ranges between 2 and 35 years. We're educated in 5 different countries among us, and we all perform both the clinical and regulatory roles for the racing in Singapore. We're all employed by the Singapore Turf Club. They're our taskmaster, and the Singapore Turf Club is a government-run organisation. So all the horses, there's about 1,100 of them here. The trainers, about 27, and the staff are all on site. The horses don't leave the site, they all race and train on the site. The only time they leave is to export, or if they're racing in another country. And the downside for the trainers here is they have to use us as the veterinary services. There's no one, they're not allowed to use outside veterinarians. So we're a little bit unique in how we run, which is why we've had the opportunity to use this technology for racing regulation. So traditionally, as we all know, horses have been described as either lame or sound. And when you look at these 2 videos, it's commonly quite an easy decision to make. And from a regulatory point of view, we like to keep it that simple. We don't really like to see horses like this that look not quite right, but we can't really say where they're lame or not lame. And they're a grey area because we use lameness and soundness as our indicators for suitability to compete. So a lame horse is not suitable to compete, a sound horse is suitable to compete, and these grey area horses make life a little bit difficult for us. But the differentiation of a lame or sound horse traditionally has been based on a visual examination of the horse trotting in hand, either in a straight line or, in my experience anyway, quite rarely for a thoroughbred racing vet to trot the horse in a circle. So certainly here in Singapore, we don't very often get the chance to trot a horse in a circle or on the lunge. The trainers don't like it, and the horses are often quite fractious when we do it. So we're really restricted to trotting a horse up and down in a straight line. But lameness is complex. We all know that. We've all had trouble with lameness. So when we come up with a complex situation as veterinarians, we try and get as much information as we can. So we look at things like head nod, hip hike, consistency of the hoof strike sound, stride length, limb flight, swelling, bandages, wounds, to try and get as much information as we can to assess the horse for lameness. But lameness is basically just describing the degree of asymmetry of movement based on the process of symmetry of movement in a horse. So to put it more simply, lameness is describing how asymmetric a limb in a horse is. All horses are asymmetric, well, most horses, sorry, I should say, are asymmetric to some extent. We call them lame when that degree becomes high enough that we worry about it. And the most sensitive way to measure a horse's symmetry of movement is the vertical movement of the horse's torso and head along the midline. And that comes from a physics principle where when the hoof strikes the ground, if there's less force, there's more vertical movement, and that's best measured from the back line of the horse. So just the video, I hope you can all see this. To prove my point, if you look at this horse trotting, probably 50% of you will get it right and 50% won't, of which limb is lame, and you'll be looking at all the things we've described before. But if you look at the video running now and you look at the sacroiliac area or the top line of the horse, it suddenly becomes quite obvious the horse has a distinct right hind lameness. Now you've probably worked out now that it's actually the same video, I've just cropped it, but it just proves the point that that's the easiest place to pick a lameness in a horse. So now we know lameness is describing the vertical displacement of the limbs of a horse, and we know we can measure vertical movement. So we can measure lameness and we can put an objective number on lameness. Now, this isn't a new idea. We've been doing this for many, many years, and we've actually gotten quite good at it. So high-speed camera technology and ground force plate technology, we can measure asymmetry very well, and these are debatably the gold standard for doing so. However, recently, we have had inertial measurement units become commercially available as another method of measuring a horse's movement symmetry. So how do they work? Well, you have probably one of the world's leading experts in the room there, I believe, in Dr. Keegan, so I'm not going to go into it too far. But on a simple racing veterinary explanation, there are multiple commercial systems that use slightly different setups of where the sensor's going, but the underlying technology are accelerometers that measure the speed of movement of a horse's head, sacrum, both tubercocks and withers, and that just depends on the system that you're using. And as you can see, they're all on the top line of the horse, so measuring the area of the horse that's most accurate. There's then some clever math that goes on that turns that speed of movement into displacement from a baseline. And then you either have a gyroscope on one limb, the right pastern and equinosis, or the wither sensor with a system called Equigate. And all they are there for is to let the computer know which limb is associated with which displacement, so you know which asymmetry is coming from which limb. So I've just told you that the gold standard is ground force plates and high-speed cameras, so why are we using IMUs? Well, they're relatively cheap, much cheaper than running and having a ground force plate or a high-speed camera system. They're easy to use. So you can see this guy in the corner here, here's one of our veterinary assistants. He instruments the horse, trots the horse, takes the measurement, and then works out if there's any issues with the trot, make sure there's enough strides, and then he'll show us the result. However, importantly, we always make sure we look at the horse trot, whether that's before it's had the instrument on, or while it's had the instrument on, or after, and I'll explain why later. Another reason we use them is there's minimal hardware. You don't need much. You need a computer, a couple of sensors, and off you go. They're portable. You can use them outside, inside, in the rain, in the snow, in the sunshine, on any surface, which obviously you can't do with the other methods. And the results are rapid and easily understood. So you have all the information you need if you want to delve into it. But if you're a racing vet, you just look and make sure all your dots are in the green circle, or all your dots are in the red area, or your red line is within the circle, or the coloured lines are within these grey areas here. And the equinosis system has an added feature that will actually put it nice and simply for you with what's wrong with the horse. So you don't need a lot of training to understand the results. However, you do need a lot of training to interpret the results in a lot of the situations. Also, they've been validated against those gold standards. So we know they work, we know they're accurate, and we know they're effective. But why do we need them in racing regulation? We use them a lot in Singapore clinically for nerve blocking. We're trying to assess horses that we finding it difficult to determine which leg is lame. But if you're a regulatory vet, all you want to know is the horse lame or sound? Is it fit to race or not fit to race? One of the reasons is the clinical use is increasing exponentially in the racing industry. We've probably been very slow to take it up, but now that it's taking up, there's a lot of clinical vets, a lot of trainers, and a lot of owners are relying on the results. And in fact, in Singapore here, we will often get the trainers to ask us to put the machine on a horse that's performing poorly if we can't see a lameness. So once the clinical side are trusting the technology, they'll be starting to ask us when we put our regulatory hats on, why aren't you using the same technology to determine if my horse is lame or sound and fit to race? Making objective decisions. This is probably the most important area why we need them in racing regulation, in my opinion. Because firstly, it improves consistency. So we've had numerous studies that have shown that we're actually not too bad as veterinarians if one veterinarian is looking at the same horse or numerous horses. We've got room for improvement, but we're fairly consistent. But if you put a bunch of veterinarians together to look at horses, we're not that consistent. And that's not just in degree of lameness, but we'll often pick different legs for lameness as well. Also, having objective measures of lameness can remove some of the issues that cause inconsistency with just trotting in hand. So the person standing behind you, telling you which leg the horse is lame in, the speed of the trot, the guy holding the horse, it can help to improve your consistency in that way. And then no matter how good you are or experienced you are, we are limited by the sampling rate of our eye. So we can only see a certain degree of lameness, and you can't read any textbook or do any course that will improve that. That's your eye. And the computer and the sensors can do much better than we ever will be able to. Now, what we find it very useful for in Singapore is reducing disagreements. So as an objective third opinion. So if you have a clinical decision and a regulatory decision and they don't agree, so the person doing the regulatory examination says this horse is lame, and often the vet that's been looking after the horse says, no, he's fine. Or with the trainers, we use the system as an objective third opinion. And it removes bias. So it's been shown, again, numerous times that as clinical vets, we often are biased with nerve blocking. We like to think that it's improved more than what it has. I certainly do that. I'm guilty of that, especially on a Friday afternoon. But as regulatory vets, we like to think we're not biased at all. But I think we have to accept that we are. For example, if you have a horse break down in race 1 and you have a horse break down in race 2, I think it's fair to say that the horses in race 3 are going to get a much more highly scrutinised examination. So although we try not to be biased, there is bias there, but the computer is not biased. And importantly, it'll improve our ability to compare findings. So with the globalisation of horse racing, if I send my horse from Singapore to the United States to race for an international race, I may say that the horse is fit and it's sound in Singapore, it's acceptable for us. I send it over there, you trot it up and wonder what we do here in Singapore because the horse looks lame to you. If we can have a measurable, objective measure of that lameness, we can share that information. We can see if the horse was the same as it was in Singapore, but also it will help us globally to become slightly more consistent. So where are we at, or what are we using for at the moment? Well, our main use is as a third umpire or a third referee or a TV referee. So we use it as a third opinion. So any horse in Singapore that undergoes an official veterinary examination and fails that examination on lameness, has a lameness locator examination taken, excuse me, and documented. So the reason for that is we often had trainers come back 2 days later after we failed their horse and tell us that the horse is fine, because it's basically had 2 days off and injection of anti-inflammatory, and they tell us it's fine, why did you fail the horse? So now we have a documented amount of asymmetry that horse had, and we do the same thing for horses that are reported as lame post-racing. Often the next day they'll be sound or better, or often the next day the horses that were sound after racing, we check them again the next day and they may be lame. Now this works both ways. For me, a few weeks ago I had a horse I failed post-race for being lame. We put the machine on it as our protocol, and the horse's asymmetry ended up being just below what we accept as the threshold in Singapore. So we reversed the decision and it passed the examination. And it gives her a numerical measurement of asymmetry. Now, trainers like this. If I tell a trainer, I think he's about 2 out of 5 lame, I have one trainer that tells me there's 2 types of lameness. There's vet lameness and there's trainer lameness, and the numbers are different. So when you can give them an actual numerical number of the asymmetry of the horse, and you can say to them, it's above what we accept or what we think is normal, they seem to accept that much better. This is an area that we're starting to look at. I think Dr. Keegan spoke more on this, but we did a 12-month study here in Singapore where we followed a number of horses, measured their asymmetry every month, and it's very low numbers of horses, but we had one horse whose asymmetry increased slowly over time, and then it injured. Now that sort of sparked my interest a little bit. Is there a way we can measure these horses over time to give us a red flag or an indication that something may be going on? Now the numbers are very low, and that is part of the issue in that we want the numbers to be very low because we don't want horses to get injured, and it's difficult to study because you need huge numbers of horses to get an injury because our injury rates thankfully are relatively low. What are the current limitations? It's not predicted for an injury for a single measurement. So when I first started using this, I thought this would be great. I can put it on all the horses before they race, and it will give me an idea that a horse is going to injure itself. We can pull it out, and it will all be good. Well, so far that hasn't happened. Some horses will have higher amount of asymmetry and never injure. Some horses will have a lower amount of asymmetry and injure. So maybe we haven't worked it out yet, but currently we can't predict an injury from a single measurement. The consistency of results is another limitation. So the different machines, different surfaces, different people applying the sensors, there is some slight inconsistency between those measurements. There's even slight inconsistency between trotting the same horse up and down a few times. So although the inconsistency is low, it means we can't draw a nice fine line in the sand. The other big issue for us, and this will be different with every different jurisdiction, but we do our pre-race examinations between races. So we have fields of 10 to 12, and we race every 30 to 35 minutes. We trot the horses down when the race previous to that go out to the start. So it takes less than 30 seconds per horse to do it traditionally way. So you can see one of our veterinarians here and the horses trot past him. So about 5 minutes for a field, and they go down, get settled and go out. For the objective asymmetry measurement, it still doesn't take very long, but by the time you apply the sensors, trot the horses enough to get the correct number of strides, and have the computer give you a result, it's just less than 3 minutes we looked at. And if you do the quick maths in your head, 10 to 12 horses, approximately 3 minutes, there's no way we'll get through them all between the races. So the system we use, that's a limitation. And then there's the debate amongst the veterinary community. Until we have everyone on board and everyone accepting the technology as a third opinion. It obviously is of no value as a third opinion, because if people won't accept it, then they won't agree with it as an opinion. And then bilateral lameness is underestimated. I'm not sure if Dr. Keegan's spoken to you about this, but this is the reason, and the important reason, why we make sure we always look at the horse when it's trotting. So I sort of like to describe to people, it's the same as having a very sick horse in front of you and taking a blood test, and the blood test is totally normal. If the test doesn't match the horse, then something's wrong. You have to go looking further. And this is sort of my area of interest, is we need evidence-based thresholds for fitness to race. So the thresholds for lameness with the machines that are currently available are not specific to thoroughbred racehorses. And in my opinion and my experience, the thresholds will be different for different horses. So your 13-year-old grey pony doing 20-minute beginner lessons will have a different threshold to perform. Then will a polo pony, then will a FEI dressage horse, then will a racehorse. And I think that this threshold will be based on a welfare aspect. So what we as an industry think is reasonable for horses to race with. So what's our future potential? How can we use this technology if we get over some of those limitations? Well, the first thing we need to do is develop a limiter of asymmetry. We need to know how big is the circle for a racehorse, how wide should these lines be for a racehorse, and how, this is the other system, how big is the green circle for a racehorse. Once we know that, we can use the tool as an effective way of assessing pre-race examinations. We can say at a threshold limit of X amount, those horses have an acceptable amount of asymmetry to race. If they're above that limit, they don't. They have too much asymmetry to race, and we don't think that they should race. Now, that doesn't mean that if they're below that level of asymmetry, we're just going to let them race and we're not going to look at them. But it probably could mean that if they're above that level of asymmetry, they're not going to race. We don't need to look at them. They're too asymmetric. If they're below that, they still need a clinical examination for the reasons we've described before. So if the horses are below that level of asymmetry, and you examine the horse and he's shuffling along in front and there's obviously something wrong with him, then they require further step, a further examination, clinical examination, and if that further examination reveals something further, they might either need further imaging or they're not allowed to race. Now, for me, I've discussed this with Dr. Keegan and a few others. I think we need to look more at the engineering sort of industry as far as reducing breakdowns in horses. I think we need to look for red flags. So I don't think there's a silver bullet. I don't think there's one machine that's going to tell us whether the horse is going to break down or not. I think we need to look at a bunch of red flags, and if we have too many red flags or a certain number of red flags, then that horse's risk of breaking down is too high and we don't race the horse. Now, that may include asymmetry analysis. That may include number of starts in the 6 months leading up, the number of gallops leading up to the race, track condition, horse's age. There's a lot of things that a lot of people are doing a lot of good work on that is giving us risk factors for breaking down, and I think we need to put them all together to work out what the individual horse's risk factor is. Then the other feature potential, which is interesting, is the possibility of predicting an injury if we monitor these horses over time. And finally, possibly introducing other objective forms of lameness. So some of the high-speed cameras now you can use outside where previously they couldn't, and you don't need so many reflectors on the horse. So maybe we can look at developing a trotting tunnel or a trotting area where the horse is assessed objectively on their way out to the mounting area or on their way out to a race. So just to have a look at our friend at the beginning there, whether he was lame or sound, and sort of show how we think this technology is helpful. And sorry, Dr. King, but we haven't got enough strides here, but hopefully you haven't noticed that. This horse was actually on the objective assessment. He was lame right front and right hind. And actually later he was blocked, and he blocked to the right fore fetlock and right hind fetlock. So to me, this just shows how when you look at a horse like that, you're really not sure. And this can help you then go looking at the correct limb. So I just need to thank Dr. Jeff, who is my inspiration for taking on this technology and has taught me most of what I know about it. And Dr. Kus Vandenberg, who's my boss, who supplied most of the images for the talk today. And then I have the references to try and prove that I have some science behind my opinions. And that's it. If anyone has any questions.
You make the relay. This is the micro.
Thank you very much, Dr. Forbes. Would anybody in the audience have questions for Dr. Forbes?
Does he foresee a day when this theoretical entry tunnel, they'll put these sensors on every horse entering a race, since it can be evaluated in 30 seconds?
Did you get that?
No, sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Repeat it or give it up.
Pardon?
With his microphone being there, you need to repeat it or I'll give it up.
Could I be invited for up to him?
No, it's not.
You can come down
If
here.
you
That might be
dictate,
the best way to do it, is come down and ask.
come down and ask the question. No, well, give me the question slowly and I will answer.
Does he foresee a day
Do you foresee a day
in his theoretical entry tunnel to the race
in the entry tunnel to the race
where all horses will be mounted with these sensors,
where all horses will be mounted with these sensors,
since the evaluation only takes 30 seconds?
because the actual evaluation only takes 30 seconds. In other words, every horse has a sensor, and if we watch them like hawks, that's the
That's
question.
the essential.
Yeah.
I think, as I said, I don't think at the moment that we can use them as a pre-race tool for numerous reasons. One is a one-off measurement isn't going to stop your horse breaking down anyway. We don't have the thresholds to determine how much asymmetry is too much asymmetry to make us scratch a horse or remove a horse. And the technology with the IMUs is longer than 30 seconds. It takes 3 minutes, and if you're really good, maybe 2 and a bit minutes. So depending, in Hong Kong, the pre-race examination is done the day before. So they have a lot more time and they have the possibility of maybe doing it. But again, when you have that number of horses, you either need a lot of systems and a lot of people doing it. So what I think would be more useful if we could develop it is a system, whether it's sensors or ground force or high-speed cameras, where the horses can move through it quickly and we can get a reading. And if we have thresholds, then we can say your horse is above the threshold, it can't race. But we still need to look at these horses, because some horses will go through and the machine will say they're symmetric, but they definitely won't be symmetric. So the Hong Kong system also, they look at tendons, flex joints, they do a lot more, and I think that's important. I just think this is one tool or one possible red flag we can put into the system.
Next question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Forbes. Another question?
Yes. Does he feel,
Do you feel?
with all of the information that they have in place, not just the locator, but what he was just talking about, does he feel like it has made a significant difference in the number of breakdowns that they have under their jurisdiction? Do they feel good about it, that they made a difference?
The basic question, if I got it correctly, is given this technology and the other approaches that you're using in Singapore, do you feel that you have made a positive contribution in the reduction of the injury rate? Is that the question?
Yeah, I think. Sorry. Yeah, I think if we weren't doing what we're doing, our injury rate would be more, or would be higher. I think that's not because we're picking up every horse that's going to break down. There's a number of reasons for it. One, I think we stop trainers from entering horses that are too lame because they know we're gonna look at them. But are we anywhere close to where we want to be? No. We always looking and talking with other jurisdictions. How can we improve? How can we make things better? Our aim is to have 0 breakdowns. I don't think we'll ever get there, but that's what we're aiming for. And I just personally think that it's a bigger problem than 1 or 2 machines that's going to help us stop horses from breaking down. We've worked a little bit with the University of Melbourne. They're looking at risk factors for breakdown, and there are some things there that we can educate trainers on that help them to stop presenting horses for racing. And I think every small piece of the puzzle will help us overall reduce the breakdown in horses. So things like, and it happens quite commonly here in Singapore, but it's something we're at the moment trying to stop, is they give horses a short period of break. So 3 to 4 weeks, they call that a spell, and then they bring them back in and they train them again. Now the University of Melbourne have shown that horses really should have longer, 6 to 8 weeks of break to help the bone turn over and to help any microfractures heal. So if you give them a shorter period of time, even 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then bring them back to race, they have a higher risk of injury. So that to me would be one red flag. If I could get myself a system, and again, I realise we're slightly lucky here if we can see what exercise the horses have done each day. We have the race records of every horse. But if we can see that and we can add all these red flags together, we can maybe say, hey, this horse is getting to an area where the risk is unacceptable and you want to think about not racing this horse.
Got another question coming?
What is the injury rate per thousand in Singapore?
What is your current injury rate per thousand that starts in Singapore? Well, first of all, how do you score an injury rate? And second, what is your current injury rate per thousand starts? And can you give us a sense of what way it has moved in recent years?
Okay, I work for the Singapore government, so I have to get permission to give you our injury rates, which is something that I think as an industry we need to work on. But I'm not allowed to release injury rates unless I have permission, unfortunately. But I can tell you we're average. We're in the middle of the world injury rates. And so, sorry, what was the other part of the question? How do we determine them? We do them per 1,000 starts, which I think is probably the best way of doing it.
Is it horses that actually go down and die on the track, or horses that are euthanized or don't come back within a certain period? In other words, is it a conservative or a more all-encompassing criteria?
Well, again, that's where we're a bit spoiled, and I certainly understand, and I know I'm lucky in that sense, but every horse in Singapore has to come through our veterinary clinic. They can't use any other vets. So it's actually based on any injury. We go through all the ultrasound pictures, we go through all the x-ray images. Whenever a veterinarian in our clinic does any diagnostic imaging, they need to write a report. So we get all those reports and we can work out what the injuries are, and we can see when the horses aren't working or they haven't raced for an extended period of time. So although it's not a perfect system, compared to Australia or I assume the US where the horses do a tendon and you just never see them again, We don't have that as much because even if these horses retire and exported, we examine the horses beforehand. So we have a fairly good system in that we can capture a large number of the injuries. So it's all injuries across the board. Breaking down on track, euthanasia, or any injury picked up on diagnostic imaging or clinical findings.
We have a question coming in from Queensland, your home country. Young lady.
If the system's so good, why are the breakdowns and injuries still average?
If the system,
Like the system they use is so, they see everything, so why are they still only average? Why aren't they better than
you're
Yeah, I got that, and that's a good question and a fairly common question. And the reason I think is because other places in the world's breakdown injuries aren't correct. They're much higher because you lose horses. If now I know I have a Queenslander there. If you have a horse racing in country in Australia that does its tendon, it may go into a paddock for 6 to 12 months and then come back and race, and that will not be recorded as an injury. We record every injury. So I actually think if we did that, and I'll use Australia as an example, if we did that in Australia, the Australian injury rate would be much higher. And then when you look at the world average, obviously it's been brought down by those horses that have been missed. So although we're average or slightly below average, I think that's because the average actually should be much higher.
Can I ask how your this same system is in place in Hong Kong? How does your injury rate compare with Hong Kong? Are you aware of that?
That's a touchy point, but theirs is better. They have a lower injury rate than us. And again, well, why is that? Well, we don't know, but my speculation is we race horses for longer and more. Their horses are worth a lot more. And when a horse is injured there, it'll often retire. They won't go through the process of rehabilitation and training again. They will retire the horse and get a new horse. That's my theory, but honestly, I don't know. I don't know if it's the training methods, the ages of the horse, the tracks. We just don't know.
Yes?
How are these horses monitored in between exams? Are they free to train, or they've just rested?
Did you hear the question?
I didn't hear that, sorry.
How are these horses monitored?
Once they're putting it on the list, and they have 7 or 9 days, are they monitored during that time? Are they free to train, or are they treated, or?
Horses on the vet list, I guess, equivalent, how are they monitored, and what restrictions on their training, and what criteria do they have to meet to return
Until the next time.
to the next start again?
I guess so. We have an official vet exam, and we have two forms of that. One is called a vet card, where the horse doesn't need to gallop, but it needs to be presented to us to pass that vet card before it can do any official exercise. So it can't trial or jump out or race, but can still train on the track. And then we have what we call a 1,000-metre vet exam, where the horse has to gallop 1,000 metres in front of the stewards to the steward's satisfaction, and then is presented to us for a veterinary examination. So for the 1,000-metre examination, they have to be trotted up, scoped, and their heart auscultated to. For a vet examination, we usually only look at what the examination was for. So if it was sore foot or mucus on the scope, we'll just scope the horse, or we'll just trot and examine the horse. So where we're actually currently looking at is trying to restrict these horses going on the training track. I believe Hong Kong has a system more like that, where they can actually restrict the horses from going onto the training track. Presently, we don't. The other thing with our surgeries is the surgeons will give us at the end of each month how long they want their surgeries, their post-surgical cases, to not perform any kind of examination. and the horse is not allowed to be presented to the veterinary department or any official exercise, so trial, jump out or race, before that time. So it's a way of trying to make trainers give the horses the rest they need.